So I've referenced that I wanted to make a video about how I got kicked out of my PhD program for a while now, and I keep putting that off because I've wanted to write a blog post first, but I don't know when if I'll do that. And I realized if this video does take off, that might be an incentive to finally write the blog post, plus it's going to let me clarify stuff doing this video. So let me go through the whole story of what happened. So I went to undergrad at Hampshire College, where basically it's set up for your entire third year you're doing an undergrad thesis. And you have 2 classes, and then everything else is focused on this thesis. And both the professors who worked with me and a lot of others who saw my undergrad thesis were like, you should really go to grad school, do a PhD. But I was like, I don't want to do a PhD. And I'd come to the conclusion I wanted to teach English abroad and then eventually get citizenship of wherever I was and start a company doing tourism, or something like that. And how I got there is a story for another time. But as I talked about, I got deported from Turkey, and then I had a job offer in Ecuador that fell through after a change of government. And then I started thinking, because I was realizing the 2008 financial crisis had fundamentally changed the job market for English teaching, and the good jobs now required a master's degree. And I lived close to the School for International Training in Vermont. I could have commuted there. I could have done a master's, but that would have been $50,000. And I was like, I don't know that I want to spend $50,000 on a master's in teaching English for the rest of my life. If I'm going to go to grad school, it makes sense to do a PhD in something that, like, the market could change again, and I don't want to do this anyways. And I'm like, maybe I should do computational linguistics, because I had studied psycholinguistics in undergrad, but there's not a lot of money in that, whereas computational linguistics there was. And so I took some computational linguistics classes at UMass, and I loved it. And I was like, okay, I don't know that I want to do grad school for computational linguistics, like the way that they're doing it. I like it well enough. But what if I could do computational pragmatics, pragmatics is the part of linguistics that is probably the least studied by linguists, but it covers stuff like irony, implication, presupposition, stuff like that. And that just is really interesting to me. And was anybody doing it? And so I asked my former advisor, undergrad advisor, and she said there were 5 schools that had people doing it. And one of them I didn't do anything with. I think I couldn't figure out who it was even at the school doing it. And then one was UC Santa Cruz, and I didn't know the guy. I emailed him, and he wasn't super encouraging, but I applied anyways. 2 of them were at Stanford, and one of them I actually knew the guy because he taught at UMass when I was at Hampshire College, and his wife taught at Hampshire College, and she had been the head of the linguistics club, which I forget if I was officially one of the 3 student organizers or not, but I was heavily involved with that. And so I'd met him a few times, and I reached out to him, and he basically told me, yeah, I don't think you would get into Stanford, and I don't think you would be a good fit for the program. I don't know if he remembered me specifically or if he was basing it on my being a Hampshire student, because there are stereotypes about that, which I'll talk about in a video soon, I hope. But anyways, I got almost a perfect score on my GRE. I got a perfect score on the verbal section of my GRE, and I got 1 point off on the math section, which, having looked at the math stuff again, trying to help a friend who thought about going to grad school, I'm like, I could very well have just gotten that wrong with an ADHD, carelessly just reading the question, especially with how long this test was. And I had good grades in the courses I took that were graded, because Hampshire courses weren't graded, but half my courses were at schools where they were graded. And I did a undergrad thesis that both the professors I worked with and professors I didn't work with that saw it were really impressed by. So it seems like, on paper, I think the issue with Stanford is that it's fundamentally a school for elites, and I am not. But anyways, I don't remember if I applied to Stanford or not, but I did. There were 2 other schools where the people who were doing sort of computational pragmatics there were very encouraging. So one of them was Alex Laskarides at the University of Edinburgh. But the problem with that one is that the doctoral program in the UK is 3 years, and you need to have a very specific plan for what you're going to do to get through it. And if you are not an EU citizen, because this was pre-Brexit, you need to find a scholarship that will cover the difference between EU and non-EU tuition, which is enormous. And so I looked at that and I said, I don't have a specific plan for what I want to do that I could do in 3 years. And without that, I don't have a convincing case to get a scholarship. So the other person who was doing this was David Beaver at the University of Texas, Austin. He was very encouraging. And I didn't really have a plan aside from it would be neat to try to combine computational linguistics and pragmatics. And I realize now, I keep talking about Nassim Nicholas Taleb's Anti-Fragile and Seneca's Barbell, which I'll link that video I made on that topic. And the smart thing that I should have done in hindsight is I should have said, I want to do both. I want to do pragmatics and computational linguistics. And I'm going to be just learning the computational linguistics stuff and doing pretty standard comp-ling stuff. And then I'm going to be doing original pragmatic stuff where I have a much stronger background. Instead of trying to find a synthesis of both, that was not working. So sort of the first two mistakes I made here. The first one was grad school was basically my fallback plan, and I didn't know what else to do. So I was like, okay, I'm going to try to convince myself I'm into computational linguistics and try to do that. And then I sort of did, but then I tried to compromise between what I was really interested in, which was pragmatics, and computational linguistics in a way that there wasn't a lot there. And so I don't get into UT Austin the first year I apply, but it turns out only 2 students are admitted to that class. The next year we have, I think it's 7 students admitted. And so I get in that year. And the thing is, the program has now changed because the Texas State Legislature has now said that you are not guaranteed funding for a PhD for more than 5 years. And there's a hard cap on PhDs for 7 years, unless you are in STEM. And obviously, Texas doesn't consider social sciences STEM. And the average PhD, if you don't know, is 8 years. And so that should have been sort of a warning. But I'm like, well, this is good. I don't want to spend. My father took 10 or 11 years on his PhD. I don't want to spend that much time on a PhD, so I'll get through this in 5 years. But, well, let's get to that. So I moved to Texas. And I was not diagnosed with ADHD until 34, and that's because I moved to Texas, and every time I would change providers, I was taking ADHD meds as an off-label use for autism, and then very hard to do that in Texas. Easy in Massachusetts, hard in Texas. And I didn't want to look like I was demanding drugs, especially when I was off the ADHD meds. I very much didn't want to, because those help with rejection-sensitive dysphoria, and I was like, I don't want to look like a drug seeker. And so the thing is, most psychiatrists in at least Austin would be like, yeah, we don't prescribe stimulants at all, which is terrible policy, by the way, but that's a different story. And so I didn't really want to push for it, and I ended up with a doctor who would not prescribe stimulants, and he tried a bunch of other stuff which had some pretty nasty side effects instead of the thing that I know that actually worked, and I can get into that. And so the whole time I was at UT, I didn't have my ADHD meds, and in my 3rd semester, I was trying a bunch of stuff that did not work and had nasty side effects that screwed things up in my 3rd semester. So problem 3 was undiagnosed ADHD, dependent on ADHD meds, not insisting on ADHD meds. I also had no support network and didn't build one, which was problem 4. And so then I have a first-year paper that I'm supposed to do, and it's not until my 3rd semester, so it's overdue by like basically several months, that I actually have it in a way that my advisor is happy with. And I realize in hindsight that was because I would send him what I was doing, he would give me no feedback, and I didn't have feedback from anyone else, and I wasn't really explaining it to anyone else. And the reason I was able to finally do it in my 3rd semester is because I had the paper as good as I thought I could get it by the end of my first year, and my advisor wasn't thrilled on it. And then when I was trying to explain what I was trying to do with this paper in the seminar, seminars basically people would share their work, I was getting more clarity and I was able to clarify. And so after a couple of revisions, I was able to actually get that paper done. But now, so this is my 3rd semester, and my first year paper is several months overdue. And I had been TAing with David Beaver my first 2 semesters, but now I'm TAing for this guy who is very obsessed with punctuality. And one of these medications that the doctor tried because he didn't want to do the stimulant made me sleep just constantly whenever I was not in class for 2 weeks. And during that time, I was not getting the papers graded the next class. I was generally doing it within a week or week and a half. So between 2 and 3 classes after the students turned it in, which, having talked to people dealing with other TAs, that's not terribly uncommon. But this professor very much wanted next class, and I don't think he was super clear about that with me, but he was pissed about this and basically ranted and went off to the woman who was in charge of the grad student program about how unprofessional I was being by not getting these papers done the next class. And so that was 2 weeks while I was on this medication that was making me constantly sleep, because I was seeing a doctor who, by policy, would not prescribe stimulants, and I didn't want to push for that. But anyway, so I was on very thin ice for 2 reasons now. Late first year paper, and then this professor I was TAing for was really upset about these 2 weeks where I was getting student papers back to them, not very next class. And not even telling me about that. He was just complaining to the grad student advisor, wouldn't even talk to me about that. Just, okay, obviously you should know better. You need to be doing it very next class. And again, I've come to realize that is not I think probably they normally gave him grad students who would do that. And I tried to do that just instinctively as well, which might have been why they put me with him. But again, then I was on this medication that I was just constantly sleeping for 2 weeks. And so anyways, so thin ice. And then I'm trying to do this. So for my second year paper, Dr. Beaver has given me, he's like, you should try to replicate this and then make a few minor tweaks, and then it'll be your second year paper. But I didn't have enough computational linguistics knowledge to figure it out. And I was asking friends for help, and they were encouraging me to ask another professor. But rejection-sensitive dysphoria, I was like, well, I need to, at least, I feel like I haven't done enough to ask for help. I need to do the basics, but I didn't know what the basics were. And so by the end of that semester, I'm like, okay, I have a different idea, something that I can actually do for a second year paper in the 6 months remaining, and I'm confident of it, and it's going to be pretty good. And I present this to David Beaver, and he's looking not super enthusiastic about it. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess I have to try to make this thing work that I haven't made work these past 6 months, still without any meds, any support network, in this program that there was a sensitive time deadline because of the Texas legislature requirements. And so that's the other thing, is going to this program once they had these requirements in hindsight. I mean, that was why I didn't do Edinburgh, because I was like, yeah, there's no way I can do this in 3 years. But I'm like, they have scaffolding to do it in 5. But that was dependent on a few assumptions. And so I don't manage to get this done. And in fact, trying to get it done, I'm just burning out. And I'm not even getting my classwork done on time at this point, because I'm just completely burnt out trying to figure out, how do I do this? And then after I get kicked out, I talk with Dr. Beaver, and he tells me 2 things. First of all, he says, if you had done this other thing you presented me to, the thing that I suggested switching to, you'd probably still be in the program. And I was like, you seemed like you were telling me no. And again, that was probably rejection-sensitive dysphoria, but he didn't seem enthusiastic, so I guess I have to do the thing that we originally said I was going to do. And then the other thing that he said is, you were trying to do something that your whole plan of what you wanted to do as you were describing it sounded like it would take about 10 years, and you were trying to do it in a 5-year program, but I thought you had a plan for it and you knew how much, and I'm like, no, and if you told me that, I would have changed my plan. I just had no idea. But I guess that's the thing, is I often come across to people as more confident in stuff than I am, and more knowledgeable, because I arrive at stuff through different means. So frequently, I've talked about my thinking being upside down and outside in compared to most people. And so I will often, I will figure things out that experts in the field might take a decade or more to realize, and I'll ask them this question. They'll assume, oh, you must be pretty knowledgeable in this too. And it's like, no, I barely know about this, but I'm comparing it to something similar and making this inference, which I'm going to have a video on expertise at some point, because this is actually, there's a certain kind of thinking that does better at predicting certain things than the supposed experts in the field, and certain fields only. But anyways, the point is I can look both more confident and competent, apparently, than I am. And so there's just a lot of stuff that went wrong in this program. And basically a lot of things, so if I had not gone to UT, I probably would have gotten a PhD, and I had this 5-year time limit. If I had pushed to actually do the thing I knew I could do in 6 months, I probably would have got my second year paper, and I probably would have eventually had conversation with Dr. Beaver, scaled down what I was trying to do, and gotten through in 5, maybe 6 years. And if I had had ADHD meds, I almost certainly would have been able to have the confidence to either push Dr. Beaver, hey, I want to do this thing, or more likely even ask for the help that I kept putting off asking for, because I'm like, I haven't done the basics that I deserve to get the help. And then the other 3 things. Well, I had no support network in Austin. I didn't build one until after, and that was not helpful. And I was used to Massachusetts. I had a huge support network that I took for granted. But then also, I was basically doing the PhD program because I didn't know what else to do at this point. My original plans had seemingly all fallen through. And I'm realizing a lot of the things I was trying to do, if I had been a little bit more persistent, they probably would have worked. But I was sort of at a nodder of my confidence. And then the other thing is, I was like, okay, well, I'm not super enthusiastic about the computational stuff, but this is where the money is, and it's interesting enough, and I like the pragmatic stuff, let's combine them. When really what I should have done is tried to say, hey, I want to do both of these things separately. And so if I had changed any of these things, probably I still would have ended up getting my PhD. I don't actually know if that would be a good thing, because so the first two things that I realized getting out of this program are I absolutely need the ADHD meds to do certain kinds of productivity. That is non-negotiable. And I need a support network. And I realized that pretty much immediately after getting kicked out. And I began working on building a support network. Then I moved to Houston just before the pandemic, which blocked me building a support network, which caused problems. And I built one later. Fortunately, that did not result in me getting fired from my job, but it did result in me underperforming relative to what I could have done if I had done that, and if it had not been for the pandemic impeding my ability to build a support network. But I learned the principle of I need to plan on doing that. But also, with Houston, I learned the principle of need to plan on doing it, but stuff can go badly awry, and you need a plan for what if the plan fails. And I also realized, because I was holding on for dear life, because I had no idea what else to do if I didn't get a PhD, because this was the thing everyone was telling me, you should be good at this, you should be doing a PhD. And again, like GRE, perfect score on the verbal, 1 point wrong on the math, that might have been tired ADHD misreading of the question. Like, I did well in the GRE, had an undergrad project that really impressed professors. Like, on paper, I should have been a good fit for grad school. So as I was editing this video, I realized that there were basically two trains of thought that I never quite finished, that I wanted to wrap up now. So one of them is I was starting to say, so because I believed grad school was my last fallback option, I had no idea what do I do if I don't do that. That's what everyone is saying I should be good at. I was holding on for dear life. I was in survival mindset, especially when stuff started to go wrong, which made it hard to really get out of that. Like, I got out of it briefly enough to come up with this other thing I wanted to do. But when my advisor seemed skeptical, I went right back into, okay, I need to just do whatever it takes, which doesn't work. You can't willpower your way out of stuff if you don't have the tools. And then the other thing is, as I said, my advisor basically overestimated my ability to do this stuff and my confidence in my own ability to do it, because I have a tendency, I've realized, as I've said, because the way I think is kind of inverted for most people, I can mislead people in both directions, and I can come across as way more confident and competent in stuff that I know nothing about. And then I can, stuff that I am actually genuinely good at, if it's stuff that most people are not, if I'm assessing my skills honestly, it comes across as arrogance, and I've sort of gotten in the habit of downplaying that to what people expect, but then I start to convince myself as well. So I've had to learn real humility means appraising myself honestly in both directions. But before I could do that, I had to learn, I know what it's going to take for me to do stuff, and if I can't do stuff, and even if people seem confident in my ability, even if they know me decently well, I still need to be like, yeah, this is where I am. I need this, this, and this in order to do this. And so once I learned that, I was then able to say in the other direction also, okay, these are the things that actually are hard for most people but are easy for me, and I need to start pushing that. But I needed to get on top of basically saying no, or saying I need this support to do this thing, and questioning people's confidence in me for stuff that might be misleading, if that makes sense. But anyway, so if I'd gotten my PhD, I might have had an easier time getting certain jobs, because one thing I noticed is there were a lot of jobs that I would apply for that I seemed very qualified for on paper, and I would not hear back at all. And that happened even after I got laid off from Chevron, is a lot of jobs that I was like perfectly qualified for on paper, never heard back. And some of these might be ghost jobs, but some of them were also, I talked to people who did the hiring, and there's a number of things. Also, they could all be for H-1Bs. So ghost jobs and H-1Bs, like fake job listings, are pretty common. But also, you have to sort of talk the talk on your resume. And so it's possible with a PhD, I knew I didn't want to be in academia, because I realized my favorite part of being in grad school was the teaching, which was everyone else's least favorite part. And I'm like, I am clearly not a fit for this environment if everyone else is saying I hate the TAing. And for me, it's like, this is my favorite part. Like, the research itself was interesting enough, but I really liked the teaching, which, I mean, that's why I'd wanted to teach English. And so the thing is, this been a few decades ago, I would have been a much better fit for how academia works than now. And I'll have videos on that. But now, if I'd gotten a PhD, I see so many people who are in a sort of similar position to me, but they got a PhD, and they lean on that heavily as a credential. And that also limits what you can do, because the culture around that is you don't step too far outside your lane. Whereas because I have 2 years of a linguistics PhD that I didn't finish and no other real credentials, everything I'm doing is stepping outside my lane. And so I am just having to learn to get comfortable doing that and dismissing the pushback from the people who are going to get mad about it. Whereas if I'd had a PhD, I might have been, first of all, I might have been more stuck in I would not even have tried to get an academic job, because at this point the market was awful, but I would have tried to get another corporate job. I might have gotten a better one, and I might have stayed there in an environment that wasn't great, but was making enough money that I was like, why would I leave this? So it's one of those things where ultimately I might be better off, because I learned a lot of lessons about how to do stuff or how not to do stuff and what I need to actually succeed. And some of them took some time to sink in. So I don't know, would I be better off, would I not be better off if I got a PhD? What I do know is when I identified as non-binary, I would tell people the most upsetting part of this is that I have to go by Mr. instead of Doctor. And now that I'm comfortable identifying as male, like, that's not a problem. And it also means it would be kind of funny to say, no, Dr. Panett was my father, but it's... So anyway, that's the story. I'm sorry it's a little rambling. I might end up retelling it, depending. If this doesn't get a lot of views, I might, after I write the blog post, retell it more clearly. But wanted to get this out, tell the story. Thanks for watching. I'm Magpie, this is Leela, and I'll see y'all in the next one.